Episode 9 is the season finale, and it's called The We Are, which is a play on the You Are, which is Rickon's book. Last week, we left off with Dylan activating the overtime contingency. Then we see Irving, Helly, and Mark all wake up at the same time. The camera immediately pans to Mark, and it shows how he deals with the conversation that he is having because he's talking to Miss Cobell. The first sentence he hears her speak is, "Talk with your sister. It's an important decision." He says, "My sister?" She questions if he's okay. He says that he's a little woozy and he needs to use the bathroom, but he starts walking the wrong way, and Cobell has to correct him and say, "No, the bathroom's that way." Then we see Irv. He wakes up realizing that he is painting and listening to really loud rock music. He looks around and notices all of his artwork, which is basically the same hallway painted over and over again. Then we finally see Helly. It was a cliffhanger last week, seeing her all dressed up, and now we see who she's talking to. It's Natalie. And then Natalie says, "We need you nimble. You're on in 20. She then introduces her to a woman named Gabby, who's the same woman that Devin met at the birthing retreat, who is the senator's wife. So Natalie introduces Helly to Gabby as Helena Egan. She's an Egan. The camera then focuses back on Dylan, who's really picking up the slack this episode for everybody else. He's stretching with both arms stretched out as far as he can possibly reach to keep the OTC going. Mark is in the bathroom trying to get his bearings straight to figure out where he is. He says to himself, "Okay, where am I?" And then Devin walks in with a baby. So he doesn't know whose baby that is. He wonders if it's his. And he says, "How's our baby?" Devin says, "You mean how it takes a village?" Then she says she wants to have the life change talk with him, but she needs to pump first. Then we see Irv. He's walking around his place and he sees that he has a dog named Radar. This name was brought up in a wellness session with Miss Casey when she was telling him things about his Audi. Then Mark sees some random couple who ask him questions of his sister, and he says, "My sister?" And he learns who Devin truly is. He then excuses himself from the conversation and walks away. Rebecca walks up to Mark and says, "So I'm told to share my book with you." Mark is still really confused by all this, but he just says, "Yeah." He then finds Devin, and she says she's ready for the life talk change. He says, "We're close, right? We need to talk." She says they can talk at the first reflection break during the book reading since it's that serious. Helly, or Helena now, I guess, asks Gabby how many kids she has. She says, just gave birth to my third. Should have stopped at 2. Helly says, "Wow, 3 kids?" She replies, "Couldn't have done it without a little help." This confirms Devin's theory. So Devin thought that this woman specifically was severed to carry her pregnancy. And this turns out to be true. Gabby then goes on to say, "I can't believe people want to outlaw Severance." Helly agrees with her, but we know how she truly feels. This episode does a really good job of going back and forth between Irv, Helly, and Mark to show what they're all up to, and Dylan, showing that he's just staying strong throughout this. So they quickly go back to Irv, and he notices all these war medals and other accolades hanging on his walls. So we're slowly learning more and more about Irving as this episode goes on. Really, the only person that we knew anything of his Audi was Mark before this. So we're all kind of learning more about each and every one of them little by little as this episode plays out. And the director, Ben Stiller, did a great job in pacing in this episode. Angelo, the senator who's married to Gabby, he said he's very impressed with the photo display. There's a bunch of photos of Helly, which is all propaganda, which shows her looking like she's in a good mood. And this shows what Milchek was really up to. So every time he was taking a photo, it was for this Egan family gala. He was supposed to make it look like Helly was always happy while she was severed. And Helly starts to notice that this is all much bigger than she initially had prepared for. And you can tell by her face, she's a bit overwhelmed at the moment. Angelo then says to Helly, "Let's change some minds." And Helly says, "Well, I'm certainly going to try." Angelo then says, "Please thank your father if you see him." Helly says that she will. Rebecca then calls Mark to sit next to her so they can share the book for Rickon's reading. Rickon dedicates the reading to his daughter, Eleanor. Then he begins to read from his book. Cobell slides right next to Mark and says, "Hey, can I read from this book as well?" He says, "Sure." Right back to Helly. Like I said, the pacing is phenomenal in this episode because the camera focuses right on Helly just as Rickon reads the line, "Who are you?" It's a perfect transition. Then we see more of the propaganda prepared for the Egan family gala. It's just several photos of Helly smiling, looking like she's always having fun at work, when the reality is she threatened to chop off her fingers. She tried to commit suicide. It was complete difference from what they're making it out to look like. The sign reads Helly, a Severance story. Irving then opens a box and he finds a uniform from the US Navy along with a photo of his father. So we find out all the memorabilia all around his apartment all belong to his father, who was in the Navy. He then digs deeper as Rickon goes back to reading. Rickon then says, let's take a 7-minute reflection break. As Rebecca says, that was transformative. I'm going to have to change my name again. Rickon and Mark then talk for a little bit, and Rickon confides in Mark that he's worried that the night is going badly. But remember, Mark's Annie loves this book. He was never even allowed to read anything else. So he had this book and he kept it sacred to him and he read it as often as he could. So he really looks up to Rickon. His Annie does anyway. And his Audi never even got to read the book. So this is really confusing Rickon. Rickon says, you actually read my book? And Mark says, the book changed my life. And then he goes on to say, Rickon, are we friends? And then Rickon kind of takes this in a positive manner. And then he goes on to say, I don't blame you for choosing Severance. You had to deal with tragedy in whatever way suited you. And I respect you for that. And they share a nice moment together. And it seemed like Rickon was always looking to have this type of conversation with Mark, and he finally got it. Cobell then goes up to Mark and says, you seemed tense during our hug. Because remember, his innie woke up mid-hug. So he tensed up right when that happened. She then says, did you mean what you meant before about your plans? Tell me more. She's trying to see if he remembers what they were talking about. But he says, I'll be right back, okay? Then he says, thanks, Miss Cobell. He gives it up. He doesn't know that she's going by the name Mrs. Selvig, calls her Miss Cobell. So then right there, Miss Cobell knows that's Mark's innie. That is not Mark Scout's Audi. Devin then asks Miss Cobell to watch the baby as she goes and talks to Mark. She hands the baby off, and then Mark and Devin are finally alone. But we go right back to Helly. She sees her Audi speaking propaganda on video, and you can see in her face that she's starting to absolutely lose it. But you can tell her father had a lot of influence on her on the way she spoke about her father in these interviews. Then we see Cobell is in her car speeding back to Lumen. We don't know if she has the baby in her car, but we're led to believe it at this point in time. She's calling Milchek. He will not answer. Next scene, we find out what Irv found underneath his father's Navy uniform and picture, and it turns out his Audi has been up to a lot of work behind the scenes. He had names, addresses, and a bunch of information on other severed employees. He flips through the documents and finds that he has Bert's address and his name clearly marked off on the map. So maybe they knew each other. We don't know at this point. Helly then tries to gather herself and find some space, but ends up being found by her father, James Egan, the current CEO of Lumen. He says she looks lovely. He asks if she's still in pain because he knows about the attempt on her life that her innie made. He said he can't believe that happened to her, but thank you so much for going through with this. Your grandfather would cherish what you've done. Basically, praise Kier. He asks if she'll be all right for her speech. He talks about the first chip he ever brought home. She said, it looks so pretty, Daddy. Everybody in the whole world should get one. And then James says, now they will, because of you. They will all be Kier's children. He leaves and she tries to calm herself. So now we get the general idea of what Lumen is really trying to do in the grand scheme of things. Back to Irv, he's trying to find his car keys. He does. Then he grabs the map that his Audi had made. He grabs his coat and he heads out the door to try to find his car. He gets in his car and we quickly find out that he has no idea how to drive, but he figures it out because nothing's going to stop him from getting to Bert's house right now. Then we see Mark and Devin. Mark had already told Devin about everything by the time we see him again, and Devin is reacting to all this information that she just found out. She said that his Audi has been trying to figure out what Lumen does. He says he just wants to know why he's in there in the first place. Devin goes on to tell him, well, you lost your wife a little before you started working at Lumen. And she says that it was a car accident. She says that he tried teaching. Mark says, I was a teacher? She says, yeah, but you tried teaching again. It was a disaster because the accident was still very much so in your veins. That's why you got the job at Lumen, to be spared from any further pain. Then he learns his wife's name was Gemma, and he says that was a nice name. Devin says, yeah, we were all very close. It was really nice. Then we see Irv on the road, map in hand, eyes on the road, when just then Cobell speeds right by him, headed to Lumen. She calls Milchek again and again when finally he answers. He says, hey, I'm not supposed to talk to you right now. But Cobell screams, the OTC has been triggered. Mark S. is his innie. Milchek says, impossible. She says, it's Dylan. They've been planning it all along. Milchek says Helly's at the gala. She says, get to the security office and shut it off now. I'll take care of Helly. Then we see Milchek bolting towards the security office. He tries to open the door, but Dylan's tie stops him for now. Milchek tries to reason with Dylan, but Dylan just screams, "Fuck you, Mr. Milchek." Devin and Mark are then chatting about what to do, and they both agree that they should be careful about the situation. He doesn't know how much time he has. He doesn't know when his out he's going to wake back up. But then he remembers that Cobell's there, and he says, "Hey, why is Cobell here?" And Devin says, "Who?" And he says, the woman in the flowery purple outfit. And Devin says, "Are you talking about Mrs. Selvig?" And Mark says, "Yeah, but her name is Cobell." Devin runs right out the door looking for Mrs. Selvig, Cobell, whatever you want to call her at this point, because she left her kid with her. She runs right out into the living room and interrupts the reading and says, "Where's Mrs. Selvig?" She yells, "Eleanor, we need to find her right now." They all run outside and find out that her car is gone, and everyone erupts into chaos looking for Eleanor. Milchek is still trying to reason with Dylan. He's saying there's prizes you don't even know about, and he'll get him a coffee cozy as soon as he opens up this door. Dylan screams right back on him, "I want to remember my kids being fucking born." Milchek claims he has 2 other kids, and he'll tell them their names if he just opens up the door. Then Cobell arrives back to Lumen and rushes inside, while Helly is headed towards the stage. Her speech starts in just 2 minutes, according to Natalie, as she preps her on what to say. Irv, still parked out front, sees inside Bert's house, and he sees he's with another man, and he looks very happy. Right back to Mark. He finds the baby, but then another guest comes in and oddly says, "I found your child. I'm the one that found her." So that guy was super strange. But then Milchek gets closer and closer to breaking in, but Helly is on stage at this point. Right at the point that Helly gets on stage, Mark sees a photo that really catches his eye. Cobell gets to Helly and says, "Is it you?" Helly says, "I'm going to kill your company." Cobell says, "My company? Think about what you're doing." She claims that all her friends, Irving, Dylan, and Mark, are all going to suffer in pain if she tells the truth. They will just torture them for the remainder of their shifts at Lumen. We cut back to Mark. He picks up the photo. Just then, Helly walks on stage. Her father is looking on. Mark looks at the photo. Then we, as the audience, see that he learns that Miss Casey is actually his wife. So now he puts 2 and 2 together. She's not dead, and he has to go tell someone. So he runs out of the room. So 3 things are happening at once. Mark's running towards the living room to go tell someone that his wife is actually alive. Irving is walking towards Bert's door, and Helly's about to give her speech. All the while, Milchek is still trying to break in the security office. This is a really great finale. Irving approaches the door. Milchek closes in. Mark runs in screaming his sister's name. Helly starts her speech, and right off the bat, she says that everything about Severance is a lie. The crowd actually laughs. They think she's joking. Irving is banging on Bert's door, screaming Bert's name. Mark is still running looking for his sister, screaming her name. And then Helly says, "No, listen, we're not happy. We're miserable down there. They torture us. We're prisoners." And as she says that line, she's tackled. And at the same time, Dylan is tackled, which stops the overtime contingency. But right before OTC was stopped, Mark screams out, "She's alive," to end season 1. So that's it for season 1 of Severance. I absolutely love this show. I want to thank the recaps for having me. I've been Dan from Scene Invaders. We have a podcast called Scene Invaders and a YouTube channel called Scene Invaders. So if you'd like to see some of that, we drop weekly videos and we do a weekly podcast. So if that sounds interesting to you, check it out. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time.